why do people commit crimes? I mean, it's a question humanity has grappled with for centuries, right? And our answers, well, they've changed dramatically over time. So today, we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating evolution of how we understand crime. We're exploring the various schools of criminological thought.
That's exactly right. And, this isn't just some dusty history lesson. Understanding these different schools is really crucial because they represent these evolving ways of thinking, these paradigms that have profoundly shaped, well, everything. Our criminal justice policies, our legal systems, even our basic attitudes towards crime and punishment. We're going to unpack how different eras tried to make sense of criminal behavior.
Yeah, we've been looking at a pretty comprehensive overview of these distinct perspectives. It's quite an intellectual journey to tracing how things developed. And it reveals some really surprising shifts along the way. Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's see how our understanding has transformed. All right, first, imagine a time, way back, when the very concept of crime was tied to forces completely beyond human understanding. We're talking the distant past, before systematic thought really took hold. Think Middle Ages, generally.
Exactly. This was the pre-classical school era. Explanations for crime were just rooted in religious, spiritual, or even supernatural beliefs. So criminal acts, often put down a demonic influence, maybe evil spirits or, the devil himself. Individuals might be seen as possessed or just inherently evil. And sometimes misfortune or criminal acts were interpreted as divine punishment for sins, basically.
So if it's all about divine judgment, did anyone ever question why one person was, say, possessed and another wasn't? I mean, was there any concept of human error in that system? Or maybe just bad luck?
Not really, no. Not in the way we think of it. Justice administration was characterized by these incredibly, irrational and often brutal methods, like trial by ordeal, think trial by fire, trial by water.
Wow.
Yeah, the outcome was literally believed to be determined by divine intervention. So forget individual rights or proportionality of punishment or systematic legal procedures. None of that existed. Punishments were often incredibly severe, arbitrary, very public, really designed to deter through sheer fear. It's hard to imagine that level of fear and uncertainty in a justice system today, isn't it?
It really is. It certainly highlights what a fundamental shift was needed, moving away from those supernatural explanations. Because, how could you even begin to build a just society if justice itself felt like you said, a game of chance decided by unseen forces?
Yeah.
You wonder how we ever moved past that. But we did move past it. And it's actually quite remarkable how thinking evolved from, divine intervention straight to this emphasis on human reason. So fast forward to the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment, and suddenly there's this really revolutionary idea emerging centered on human free will. This is the classical school.
Exactly. And this school emphasized rationality, free will, and the idea of a social contract. The core idea, the main tenet, was that individuals are rational beings. They weigh the pleasure, the benefits of committing a crime against the potential pain, the costs of punishment. It's often called the hedonistic calculus.
Hedonistic calculus, okay.
Right. And the idea of a social contract was also key. Basically, individuals give up some liberties to the state in exchange for protection, for stability, and laws are a necessary part of that agreement, to keep everyone safe.
Okay, so if everyone is rational, making these calculations, what was the main goal of punishment then? Just make the pain side heavier.
Deterrence. That was paramount. Both specific deterrence for the individual offender and general deterrence for society as a whole. Punishments were meant to be fixed by law, strictly proportionate to the crime, not the individual person. And for punishment to work, it had to have three key things. Certainty: offenders needed to know they would be caught. Celerity, swiftness: punishment had to follow quickly. And severity, just enough to outweigh the pleasure of the crime, but crucially, not excessive. And Beccaria, one of the key figures, stressed that certainty was actually the most important element, more than severity.
Interesting.
And another huge point: equality before the law. Everyone treated the same, regardless of their social status.
That sounds like a wonderfully logical system on paper. So who are the big names, the minds who really champion this new way of thinking?
Well, the giant is Beccaria. His book On Crimes and Punishments from 1764 was incredibly influential. He argued for humane treatment, abolishing torture, having public and speedy trials, and punishments that were, like we said, proportionate, certain, and swift. He even argued against the death penalty. Then you also have Jeremy Bentham. He developed utilitarianism, that idea of the greatest good for the greatest number, and he famously designed the panopticon prison concept. The classical school really truly laid the groundwork for modern criminal justice systems. It influenced legal reforms, norms, codified laws, our whole emphasis on due process.
Yeah, it's quite profound when you think about it. Core ideas like innocent until proven guilty, or even just having specific sentences for specific crimes that all started right here. What's really insightful, I think, is how this core belief in human rationality, even centuries later, still kind of subtly influences our gut reactions to crime. It often makes us overlook other factors, doesn't it? But okay, as powerful as these classical ideas were, applying them perfectly, that must have been challenging. I mean, what happens when someone truly isn't a rational actor in that perfect calculating way? What about a child? Or someone struggling with severe mental illness?
That's exactly the issue they ran into, and that's precisely where the neoclassical school comes in. It emerged in the 19th century really as a practical modification of that strict classical view. It acknowledged that, well, not all individuals are equally responsible. Factors like age children, obviously, or mental illness, intellectual disability, even being under duress. These could affect someone's capacity for rational choice.
Right, makes sense.
So this led to a push for some judicial discretion in sentencing, allowing judges to take these individual differences into account, for more individualized justice. They also started distinguishing between first-time offenders and repeat offenders, recidivists, suggesting different approaches. It just introduced this necessary layer of nuance.
Ah, okay. So this is where we start asking not just what did they do, but maybe beginning to ask, why did they do it? Sounds like this kind of nudged the door open for a whole new way of thinking about the causes of crime beyond just free choice.
It absolutely did. I mean, while it was still fundamentally rooted in free will, this school subtly introduced the idea that certain factors might influence behavior. And that really paved the way for the later positivist theories. This is where figures like Cesare Lombroso enter the picture. He's often called the father of modern criminology.
Lombroso, right? The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he really shifted things. He moved beyond just philosophical or moral explanations and tried to apply, well, scientific methods, or what passed for them then, to study crime, focusing intensely on the offender. He proposed his famous theory of atavism.
Atavism.
Yeah, the idea that criminals were essentially biological throwbacks. Less evolved humans, identifiable by certain physical features or stigmata, as he called them. Things like an asymmetrical face, large jaws, unusual ears.
Wait, seriously, so someone could potentially be judged a criminal just by the shape of their nose or their ears. That sounds, well, incredibly unsettling and frankly dangerous in its implications.
Oh, it was, absolutely. While his emphasis on empirical observation was groundbreaking for its time, shifting focus to the individual, his work was, quite rightly, heavily criticized. For its biological determinism, its methodological flaws were huge, and yes, its deeply racist and discriminatory implications. He believed in the born criminal type, but later expanded his categories to include insane criminals, criminaloids, sort of occasional criminals, and criminals of passion.
Okay, so a very controversial figure, but influential in moving towards studying the individual.
Definitely. And his students tried to refine and broaden this view. Enrico Ferri, for instance, developed the law of criminal saturation, arguing crime is a natural societal phenomenon influenced by physical, anthropological, and social factors. He advocated for social defense measures and social reforms, and then Raphael Garofalo focused more on psychological and moral aspects. He introduced the concept of natural crime acts that offend universal moral sentiments, specifically pity and probity, which means sort of basic integrity or honesty. He believed criminals lacked these sentiments.
So still focusing on inherent defects in the person. Then wasn't there a different perspective emerging, particularly from France, that pushed back on the purely biological side?
Yes, absolutely. Gabriel Tarde, a French sociologist, was a really key critic of Lombroso's biological determinism. He strongly emphasized social learning. He proposed his laws of imitation, arguing that criminal behavior is learned primarily through imitation, particularly through close contact, often from those seen as superior, imitating those seen as inferior, like trends moving from cities to the countryside and through the insertion of new behaviors into a culture. He argued that the social environment, learning from others, was much more important than just biology. So this whole neoclassical discussion, it really shows the beginnings of a more nuanced justice system emerging, trying to grapple with why someone might commit a crime, not just what crime they committed.
Okay, this is fascinating. So we've moved from spirits to rational choice to considering mitigating factors and even biology. What's next? It feels like the focus is zooming in on the individual even more. It seems like we start treating crime almost like a medical condition, focusing not just on the crime, but on the individual person who committed it.
Yeah.
Is that the clinical school?
That's a great way to put it, actually. The clinical school is really a direct application of those positivist principles we were just discussing, especially the focus on the individual offender. It emphasizes diagnosis, treatment, and rehabilitation. The core idea is an individualized approach. Each offender needs a unique assessment to understand the underlying causes of their behavior. It basically views crime as a symptom of some underlying pathology. It could be psychological, biological, maybe social,
Yeah.
that can be diagnosed and hopefully treated. So the primary goal shifts pretty dramatically towards rehabilitation, addressing those specific needs to prevent future offenses.
So it must be very interdisciplinary then, drawing from lots of different fields.
Oh, absolutely. It draws heavily on psychology, psychiatry, medicine, social work, all aimed at understanding and intervening in criminal behavior. The focus really shifts from the crime itself, the act, to the person who committed it. And in practice, this thinking led directly to the development of things like probation, parole, indeterminate sentencing, where release depends on rehabilitation, psychological evaluations in courts, and various therapeutic interventions within prisons and correctional systems. Every time someone suggests therapy instead of just prison or proposes a personalized rehabilitation plan, you're essentially seeing the legacy of this clinical school in action.
Right. It makes total sense that if you're aiming to treat the whole person, you'd need expertise from all sorts of angles, not just the legal one. Though I imagine this approach isn't without its challenges or criticisms either.
Indeed. It's definitely faced criticism. One major one is that it can potentially pathologize deviance, turning social problems into individual medical ones. It can also be criticized for sometimes overlooking the larger systemic social causes of crime, focusing too much on the individual sickness rather than the sick environment. And there's also the concern that it could lead, in some cases, to indefinite detention based on a perceived dangerousness or lack of cure, rather than a sentence proportionate to the actual crime committed.
Okay, so we've drilled down into the individual. But what if we pull the lens back out? If we connect this to the bigger picture? There was another major shift, right? One that fundamentally shifted our gaze away from the individual, whether rational or pathological, and towards the environment, arguing that society itself plays a huge role. This must be the sociological school.
Exactly. This school, emerging primarily in the late 19th and especially the early 20th centuries, truly revolutionized criminology. It changed the game. It views crime primarily as a social phenomenon, a product of social conditions, social structures, inequalities, rather than just individual pathology or free will choices. Its core tenet is basically social determinism, the idea that crime is largely, though maybe not entirely, a result of social conditions and environmental factors. So it focuses on macro-level analysis, looking at societal structures like poverty, social disorganization in neighborhoods, cultural norms, group dynamics. Crime is often seen as a symptom of some kind of dysfunction within a community or society. And because of that, the emphasis naturally shifts towards prevention through social reforms, address the root causes in society.
Right, this radical idea that society itself can be in a way sick and that this sickness produces crime. It really forces us to question whether our current systems are maybe just treating symptoms rather than addressing those deeper societal illnesses. So what are some of the key ideas, the big theories that came out of this sociological approach?
Yeah. Oh, there are several really influential sub-schools and theories within this broad sociological school. For instance, you have the Chicago School, also known as the Ecological School. They famously linked crime rates to social disorganization in specific urban neighborhoods. Think Sean McKay's concentric zone theory, how different zones radiating from a city center had different crime rates linked to social conditions.
Okay.
Then there's strain theory, or anomie theory, originally from Durkheim, but really refined by Robert Merton. This suggests crime results from a disjunction, a gap, between culturally prescribed goals like achieving wealth in America and the legitimate means available to actually achieve them. That strain can lead to deviance.
I see.
You also have social learning theories. Sutherland's differential association theory is key here. The idea that criminal behavior, like any behavior, is learned through interaction with others, primarily in intimate personal groups. You learn the techniques and the justifications. And social control theories, like Hershey's social bond theory, flip the question. Instead of asking, why do people commit crime, they ask, why don't most people commit crime? The answer, they argue, lies in strong social bonds, attachment to others, commitment to conventional goals, involvement in activities, and belief in societal values. When those bonds weaken, crime becomes more likely.
Interesting contrast.
And we can't forget labeling theory, which looks at how societal reactions and applying labels like criminal can actually push people towards further or secondary deviance. And finally, various conflict theories, including Marxist criminology, which see crime as a product of power imbalances. Laws aren't neutral, they're created by the powerful to maintain their dominance and control other groups. All these sociological ideas were really game changers, leading to social programs, community-based crime prevention, and a much greater focus on systemic inequalities.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack just within the sociological view. This idea, though, that society itself plays such a huge role, it certainly shifts the conversation away from simple individual blame. But then, if society is the problem, or at least a major part of it, who truly gets to define what crime even is? And whose interests does that definition serve? And that's where the next school of thought we looked at, the new criminology, really challenges everything, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. This perspective, often called the new criminology, emerged mainly in the UK during the 1960s and 70s. It was very much a critical response to what its proponents saw as the limitations of conventional mainstream criminology. It's heavily influenced by Marxist thought, critical theory, and radical sociological perspectives. Its core is really a fundamental critique of traditional criminology. They argued that mainstream approaches failed, or refused, to address fundamental power structures and deep-seated economic inequalities as root causes of crime. The new criminology emphasizes that crime, particularly street crime, is often a product of the capitalist system itself and the class conflict inherent within it.
Okay, so it's not just about individual acts or even broad social conditions like poverty in general, but about the very economic and political system itself and who benefits from how it's structured.
Exactly. A key assertion is that laws are not neutral reflections of consensus. Instead, they are created and enforced by the ruling class, the powerful, to protect their own interests and maintain control over the working class or marginalized groups. This school significantly pushed to expand the definition of crime beyond just street crime. They insisted on including what they called crimes of the powerful.
Crimes of the powerful, like what?
Things like state violence, government corruption, corporate malfeasance, think fraud, price-fixing serious environmental destruction caused by industries, major human rights abuses, actions that cause immense harm but are often ignored, downplayed, or treated much less severely by the legal system compared to conventional crime. They even suggested that some criminal acts, particularly those committed by marginalized populations, could sometimes be understood, at least partly, as forms of resistance against an oppressive or unjust system.
That's a provocative idea.
Definitely. And their ultimate proposed solution to crime wasn't just reform, but radical social change. A move towards a fundamentally more equitable and just society. They also focused heavily on victimization, examining how certain groups are disproportionately harmed, not only by conventional crime, but also by the actions of powerful individuals, corporations, and the state itself.
This really forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About who holds power, how that power shapes the law, and how that influences what we even label as crime in the first place.
Yeah.
Taylor, Walton, and Young were key figures here, right, with their book.
That's right. Their 1973 book, simply titled The New Criminology for a Social Theory of Deviance, was absolutely foundational for this perspective. Their work, alongside the broader movements of Marxist and critical criminology, really challenged the supposed political neutrality of the field. It pushed for a much more politically engaged, critical, and ultimately transformative approach to understanding and addressing crime and justice. It also heavily influenced later critical perspectives like critical race theory and feminist criminology. So when you step back and look at the whole journey, it's really quite incredible, from seeing crime as the work of supernatural forces and divine punishment, to focusing on rational choice and free will, then shifting to look at biological and psychological factors within the individual, and finally broadening the lens dramatically to examine these deeply rooted social conditions, structural inequalities, and even the nature of power itself. Our understanding of crime has just undergone these profound transformations.
Yeah, it really has. Each school, it seems, built upon or sometimes fiercely rebelled against the ideas that came before it, constantly refining or maybe just changing the lens we use to look at this incredibly complex human behavior. It's quite the intellectual journey we've traced. So as you, our listeners, reflect on these evolving perspectives from spirits to social structures, maybe consider this. If each school we discussed revealed new layers of complexity about crime and society, perhaps peeling back assumptions from the previous era, what fundamental assumptions about crime and justice might our current dominant views still hold? What might we be taking for granted? And, looking ahead, what new school of thought, what different way of seeing might emerge next to challenge those assumptions?